G'day, it's Mark and welcome back to the channel. And in this episode, we look at the second last Falcon in the series, the FG. The FG Falcon was produced from February 2008 to October 2014. It was the first iteration of the seventh and last generation of the Ford Falcon. I remember when I was at FPV, I saw them working on the FG Clay. Orion was the official code name for the car. And I went across to the Ford studio. I'd go over there quite regularly, at least every week, if not more often. Anyway, I saw the first Clay iteration. Now, if you look on some of the sources, it says that Steve Park was the designer. Steve Park came in later in the model period. Prior to that, Simon Butterworth was still head of Ford design. But anyway, I looked at the first Clay and I thought, that doesn't look like a Falcon. And I told Simon Butterworth and a few of the other designers, Graham Wadsworth, I said, that's not a Falcon, that looks like a giant Camry. And I said, that's not going to deliver for you guys. And I'm not saying based on that, but probably did have an influence. They then reworked the Clay. And the next time I saw the Clay, I looked at the car and I said, yep, that's a Falcon. That looks like a Falcon. A couple of things that they'd worked on as part of that design process were the rear taillights, and a really nice proposal that they did, which I really liked, was one that had kind of a Mustang 3 segment sort of taillight design, the same shape as what ended up being on the car, but they were like partitioned into 3 segments. And I thought that looked really good and quite sporty and quite a nice touch that maybe was too close to the Mustang. That's why they didn't go ahead with that. Another thing was, and I'll get into this shortly, when they were replacing the Fairmont and the Ghia, they had a car proposed which was called the Super Ghia. And that was what was eventually to become the G6. And I thought that was a particularly good-looking car with a bit of an Aston Martin sort of style grille treatment, which it really did look quite good. One area of the design which I didn't particularly like, and I thought it would really date the car, were the indentations. The car has a very wedge shape. If you look at a BA or BF Falcon, that has more of a horizontal kind of block profile. If you look at an FG Falcon, it's very much tapered to a wedge. But the cutout or the indentation in the doors, I thought that was something that was going to really date the doors, and it would make it more difficult for subsequent facelifts. As it transpired, there was only going to be really, there was an FG2, but then FGX after that. There weren't too many more facelifts to go, so those doors didn't last as long as some of the other previous model Falcons. But I felt that was going to really date the car. I also didn't like it because it was going to present issues from an FPV point of view for the stripes. But to get back to the history, Ford Australia decided to do a complete overhaul of the designations of all its models in the range. So in particular, the long-standing Futura, Fairmont and Fairmont Ghia were replaced with more contemporary G6, G6E models. And that was really more for the Fairmont and the Ghia, I'd have to say. Personally, again, I didn't really like that change. I felt that, the worst thing you can do as a manufacturer, and I'll get into this later with the FPV models, is chop and change and come and go. We all remember the Probe and the Cougar, and it's not just Ford, it's happened with Holden, the Tigra, and some of these other models that just come and go. They have very short lifespans, and chopping and changing is the worst thing you can do because it doesn't build any repeat buyers, it doesn't build longevity, and it doesn't build your brand. So anyway, I felt that Fairmont and had such a great long-standing name since XP, that's when it was introduced, and the Ghia had been introduced with XD. I also love the Ghia badges, those nice little enamel-style badges. I thought they looked really good. And I thought it was a shame that they got rid of those nomenclatures and replace those with G6 and G6E. But that's just my opinion. The standard FG Falcon engine was a 24-valve, 4-litre inline 6 with variable cam timing, and that produced peak power of 195 kilowatts or 261 horsepower at 6,000 revs, with peak torque of 391 newton meters, which is 288 foot-pounds of torque. And they ran on standard 91 octane fuel. Supposedly, the power output increases to 210 kilowatts on 98 octane fuel, supposedly. From July 2010, all i6 engines, excluding the e-gas models, had to meet Euro 4 emission standards. The ZF 6-speed automatic was also an optional extra, and that was a German gearbox used in BMWs and other vehicles. Quite a good gearbox, although if something goes wrong with it, it is expensive to fix. The XR6 had the 5-speed as standard. The high-performance turbocharged versions had 270 kilowatts, which was the same as the launch output of the F6 Typhoon. Again, this is where there's a bit of brand mismanagement going on. I wouldn't have given it the same output as an FPV product. I would have made it like 265 kilowatts. You don't really want to undermine the investment people make in the high series products. But again, it put out 270 kilowatts to 362 horsepower and 533 newton meters of torque, which is 393 foot-pounds at 1950 revs. So very, very low revs and very, very flat torque curve, and very powerful car. The turbo engines in the XR6 and also the G6E Turbo had a 10-second overboost function that increased torque to 640 newton meters and power to 324 kilowatts. That was not marketed, though, I must say. In 2011, Ford introduced a new LPG system, which was marketed as EcoLPI, and the system featured liquid injection as opposed to the vapor setup used in the previous e-gas models. The new injection setup was also accompanied by new lightweight pistons and rings, a higher compression ratio of 12.0 to 1, and other modifications to improve power and fuel economy. The power rose 27% from 156 kilowatts or 209 horsepower to 198 kilowatts or 266 horsepower. And torque rose 10% from 374 newton meters or 276 foot-pounds of torque to 302 foot-pounds or 409 newton meters. This meant that the LPG models virtually matched the petrol-powered versions when they were running on 95 octane fuel. In addition, for these LPG cars, fuel consumption dropped around 15%. Now, Australia's had a long history of local production and, government required local content of around, I think, 85% local components that went into cars. That's what really, I guess, spurred on local manufacturing. But what had happened was various state, local, and federal government bodies weren't doing what they should have been doing, which was buying Australian-made product. And some states in particular, and I'll probably call out Queensland as a good example, just started buying Hyundais and other vehicles like that. And they said, look, we're not going to buy Falcons. We want 4-cylinder cars. We want more fuel-efficient cars. So Ford actually introduced a 2-litre EcoBoost engine in 2012, which used 20% less fuel and emitted less emissions than the 4-litre engine. It had 179 kilowatts, which was 240 horsepower, and 353 newton meters or 260 foot-pounds of peak torque, available from 2,000 revs all the way up to 5,500 revs. The fuel consumption was estimated as low as 8 litres per 100 on the city cycle, which is about 29 miles per gallon US or 35 miles per gallon imperial. And the Falcon was the first ever rear-wheel drive application to use the EcoBoost engine. However, it was not capable of matching the power and the torque of the 4-litre six-cylinder. Surprise, surprise, despite Ford making this initiative to make sure that it was included in the government sales at local, state and federal levels, very few were sold or chosen by the government. And I think Ford ended up selling more of those turbo 4-cylinder Falcons to itself than it did to the retail public as company cars and so on, lease cars. The FG Falcon also achieved an ANCAP, which is a safety rating, of 5 stars, and it was the first Australian manufactured car to do so, receiving a score of 35.6 out of 37. The model range consisted of the base XT. The XT was fitted with Ford's control blade IRS. The brakes were carried over from the BF Falcon. And as mentioned, the car had, with the 4-litre engine, 195 kilowatts and 391 newton meters of torque. Sadly, the wagon was no longer available, so this was only available now in a sedan or a utility or a cab chassis body style. At launch, the car was featuring a 5-speed automatic, replacing the previous Australian-made 4-speed. The ZF 6-speed option was available from launch in 2008, and in July 2010, the 6-speed was made standard. Now, I spoke earlier about the styling, and the styling was based around the kinetic design that Ford Europe used for its large cars. And obviously, since going back to XD, Europe had been a source of inspiration for the Australian-made Fords. The interior was improved over previous models. The centre console was lifted to make for a more luxurious and spacious feeling. The interior was more roomy. It had better entry and exit for front and rear passengers, because that had been an issue with the AU central body structure or design. The XT Falcon also was better equipped, so it had an MP3 compatible CD player. It had an auxiliary audio input jack, single zone automatic climate control, cruise control, 60-40 split seats with a fold down rear seat back, front and rear power windows, 4 airbags, dynamic stability control and emergency brake assist, as well as a driver fatigue warning system. From the 1st of September 2008, all XT models were specified with alloy wheels as standard, previously an extra cost option, and this replaced the 16 by 6.5 steel wheels that used the plastic hubcaps on the earlier models. The Falcon XR6 was also available as the next model in the range, and that was available in sedan, also in the cab chassis and the ute as well. And that featured the same 6-cylinder engine, the i6, 4-litre i6 as the XT, but it had a different ECU with a unique sport tune. And it came in either a 5 or 6-speed automatic transmission or a 6-speed manual. The cars featured 17 by 8 5-spoke alloy wheels. Optional 18 and 19-inch wheels were also available. The Sport Blade independent rear suspension, the IRS was, and I must mention that that's only available in the sedans, not the ute or the cab chassis. That was also fitted. A sports body kit with side skirts and rear bumper, rear spoiler, unique headlamps, front fog lights, leather-wrapped steering wheel with mounted audio controls, Bluetooth as an extra, alloy pedal covers and cloth sports seats. As of July 2010, the 5-speed automatic was no longer available, and that was upgraded to the ZF 6-speed, along with the option of the 6-speed manual transmission as standard. Next in the model lineup was the Falcon XR6 Turbo, and the Turbo came with all the features of the XR6 as standard, plus 18 by 8 5-spoke alloy wheels, limited slip differential, upgraded front brakes, which had 322mm rotors instead of the standard 298. The turbo engine was also featured in the G6E, which I'll get to shortly. The 6-speed automatic transmission was used in the turbocharged models. That was rated to handle more torque than the standard 6-speed version in other vehicles, like in the optional in other vehicles. Performance-wise, it's considered to be the fastest FG model in the range outside of the FPV products, and capable of going from 0 to 100 kilometres or 62 miles per hour in 4.8 seconds. As mentioned, the car produced 270 kilowatts or 362 horsepower and maximum torque of 533 newton meters or 393 foot-pounds. It also had the overboost function, which I mentioned before, which I think lasted up to 10 seconds. An option on the XR6 and the XR6 Turbo was the XR Luxury Pack. And this added sports leather seats, black carbon look trim inserts, dual climate control, 19x8 alloy wheels, and premium sound. The Tech Pack was also available, and that added Bluetooth and iPod integration. And both option packs together added almost all of the features found on the G6E. Although when you say almost all of the features, that's not really that true, because you didn't get the reversing camera, you didn't get the curtain and side thorax airbags, you didn't get the 8-way power adjustable driver's seat with memory mirrors, the overhead sunglasses holder, and mirror indicators. So you still got plenty of extra kit on the G6E, which I'll get to in a minute. Next in the range was the Falcon XR8. The XR8 had the same features as found in the XR6 Turbo. Styling-wise, it included the bulging hood, and that just takes my memory back again as well. The initial bonnet bulge that they developed for the FG, again, I looked at that when I went across for the clays, and I thought, nah, that's underdone. You need to make it a lot bigger and a lot, as a standout feature, as it had been in the BA and BFs. So based on my feedback, they actually increased the size of it. And again, I think Ford made a mistake here. They offered the XR8 with 290 kilowatts of power, which was the same as the launch BA GT output. Again, make it 289 or 288, or just make it different. Don't make it the same. And 520 newton meters of torque. Again, the same as the GT. Its performance figures were similar to the XR6 Turbo, because obviously the extra kilowatts were offset by the weight. A unique feature of the FG XR8 was the semi-active muffler, which opened above 2800 revs for throatier exhaust sound. XR8 sales in the sedans were not probably as good as they could have been, and outside of, I guess, the V8 sales then probably tend to go more towards the utes. The XR6 Turbo was more popular in the sedans. The XR8 was discontinued in June 2010 as a result of the 5.4 engine not complying with Euro 4 emissions standards, which was adopted by Australia at the time. The Euro 4 emissions would have robbed the engine of power and torque and would have required more investment and R&D, and obviously with the volume, it just wasn't worth doing. Plus, Ford knew it had the Mustang coming down the track. As mentioned earlier, with the FG series, Ford discontinued the Futura, Fairmont, and Fairmont Ghia nameplates. So the G6 was the equivalent of, it says the Futura, but really it's the Fairmont equivalent, not the Futura equivalent. The G6E was the equivalent to the Fairmont Ghia. The G6 was powered by the 4-litre engine, and it had the 5-speed automatic, but was upgraded to 6-speed in 2010 per the other models. Besides the suspension, which had a sport luxury tune, the drivetrain of the car was the same basically as the XT model. Equipment levels, though, had increased for the G6. It came with front fog lights, a unique front fascia, which looked quite nice. These models also came with a high series tail light treatment, which I did use for FPV. I'll get into that a bit later. A leather-wrapped steering wheel with mounted audio controls, rear parking sensors, a sport body kit with side skirts and rear bumper, and 17-inch alloy wheels. There was a G6 limited edition, which consisted of 1,500 units, and that was based on the G6. It was unknown how many of them were actually produced with the EcoBoost, but that was available as an option. And the G6 limited edition added leather seats in shadow, Bluetooth, iPod integration, sports leather wrapped steering wheel, unique fog light bezels, unique front grille upper and lower, a unique rear bumper insert, side curtain airbags, 18-inch alloy wheels, although 17-inch on the e-gas models. Also available was a G6E Turbo with the same features as the G6E, except it had the turbocharged 270 kilowatt engine, 18 by 8 7-spoke alloy wheels, lower suspension, piano black center console rather than silver, iPod integration, turbo decals, and a boot-mounted spoiler. From April 2009 production, an update was introduced, and this involved an improvement in fuel consumption on 6-cylinder models fitted with the optional 6-speed automatic. It was also announced that the LPG e-gas models, like the petrol-powered versions of the FG sedan range, had been awarded the full 5 stars in the ANCAP crash safety test. The 5-star rating, up from 4 stars, was not due to any structural changes to the FG, but it was because of the introduction of electronic stability control, which was previously only fitted to petrol-powered FG models. In 2011, the FG Mark II was introduced, and it was the first major visual upgrade to the FG Falcon since its introduction in 2008. The Mark II had a revised front fascia, similar to that of the SZ Ford Territory. This included a smaller upper grille and a larger octagonal lower grille, along with revised headlights and fog light assemblies. G6E and G6E Turbo models came standard with LED running lights. Apart from the XT and the XL and the Utes, the cars also received a new interior command centre, and that had an 8-inch touchscreen with 2D and 3D maps, SUNA, S-U-N-A, traffic updates, overspeed and speed camera warnings, street house numbers displayed, and it was fully integrated into the vehicle. Improved safety features on the Mark II included 6 airbags, dual front, side and curtains, standard on all sedan models. Generation 9 dynamic stability control system was standard across the range, and rear parking sensors were now fitted as standard. The Mark II was placed on sale in late 2011, with a turbocharged 4-cylinder EcoBoost model becoming available in early 2012. So when it came to the FPV range, this was really the first opportunity I'd had to start with a clean sheet of paper. Although I must say, with BF, I was able to make some pretty significant changes to the vehicles in terms of front and rear bumpers, wheels, and so on. I was very happy with the FPV products, and they still hold up very well today visually. And in some ways, I actually prefer those to the Orion or FG models. But in terms of this, it gave me a clean sheet of paper outside of using the standard Falcon body, if you like. And I was able to, I guess, brief the design team in. The thing that I really liked in terms of taking inspiration was there was an Audi show car, which I thought looked really, really aggressive. And I said to the designers, I really want to replicate that kind of treatment. And that's where the raccoon eyes, if you like, came from on the FG FPV products. To increase differentiation even further, I went away from using the XR headlights. I used the high series headlights from the G6 and G6E, and I also used on the rear the taillights of the high series cars as well. And I'd taken that inspiration from when I was at HSV, when I joined the VX models were being launched. And they used the high series headlights from the VX Calais or Bellina and rear tail lights as well. And I thought that just lifted the cars up and differentiated those from the standard Holden product. And likewise, I did the same thing with the FPV product versus its standard or, XR6, XR8 type products. In terms of the output of the vehicles, we had the F6 Typhoon and F6 Tornado. I'll get into the model changes to the names that happened after I left, and I thought was a very poor decision, calling them, F6 or F310. The whole idea of, Typhoon, Tornado was to build a bit of imagery around the products, have some consistency through BA and BF. And again, the whole idea is you maintain that going through. I think just changing it to a alphanumeric took away some of its imagery. And the same thing happened with the Force 6 and the Force 8 models, where they were called, GTE. Again, very nondescript. I believe the advertising agency was responsible for that, and I thought that was a big mistake. Anyway, that's what happened. Unfortunately, when I left as well, the striping packages had not been finalised. And again, I must say, I did not like the stripes that were used on the FPV products at FG. The later series ones were much better. In fact, I'll get into that as well. But I thought, accentuating that indentation in the doors with that stripe was not a good look. And then there was some sort of attempt with the decal on the bonnet to try and replicate the shaker with the decal. Again, I just thought it just didn't look quite right to me. Another thing that was changed, I guess, when I had moved on was on the rear of the Pursuit utes. Originally, the idea was to have Pursuit spelled out on the tailgate, which did happen, but originally the badges were meant to be really high quality, like the GT badges with the chrome outline with the orange inset, paint out treatment. That was how the Pursuit badging was meant to look. And instead it ended up with a rather cheap looking, just all silver effect. And it really was not what was originally briefed in or, in my original plan. So the F6 Typhoon, or now it's called the F6 310, featured 310 kilowatts of power, 416 horsepower, and 565 newton meters of torque, which is 417 foot-pounds. The V8s featured a 315 kilowatt Boss engine. That was the 5.4 litre engine. Still the iron block engine, quite heavy. I had done work with Gordon Barfield on future engines, which was the Miami project, but that was to come later on. But in the launch model, 315 kilowatts, 422 horsepower, and 551 newton meters of torque, which is 406 foot-pounds. As mentioned, the Force 6 and Force 8 models, which had only been launched in BF, were renamed to GTE. I thought that was a stupid idea, frankly. You're just building the name Force 6 and Force 8. So what do? You kill it after one model and call it a completely new name, which doesn't really mean anything to anyone, GTE. Anyway, that's what they did. Another mistake. They were originally conceived as Force 6 and Force 8. Rod Barrett had taken over at that point, and one model he introduced or was responsible for, which was not in my product plan, was a low-cost FPV model. Originally, the Tornado Ute was the lowest entry point, but he introduced a GS model and played off the GS nameplate from the 1970s. Had quite a nice stripe package, which was, influenced by that, and that was featured on the cars. And I thought that looked quite good. They were available on the sedans and utes. There were 250 sedans, and I believe there were 75 utes. In October 2010, as I mentioned, Gordon Barfield and I had been working on a future powertrain plan. Because Ford owned Jaguar at the time, with Jeff Pilates at the helm of Jaguar, we even investigated using Jaguar aluminium quad cam V8, which had supercharging available. That was on the cards early on. Then we started working with the American team, and we found out there was a new engine coming, which is the Miami Coyote 5 litre, which was the all-alloy 4 valves per cylinder V8, 302 cubic inches, and that was destined to then replace the old 5.4 Boss. So a lighter engine, more powerful, an ideal power plant. And the striping package that was applied to that car was more in line with what I would have done, which was almost like a 1970 Boss Mustang look. And I particularly like that. And I think that's the best looking version of the FG. The GS models, which are the low priced vehicles I mentioned before, they had a 315 kilowatt, 422 horsepower version, detuned of that engine. The GT, GTE, and GTP models featured a 335 kilowatt Miami V8 supercharged, 449 horsepower. That's a terrific engine. Again, because I'd moved on, I really didn't have any input into some of these limited editions that were released. I would have certainly launched a Cobra in the FG model range. I also had been working with John Goss. I was going to do a John Goss special edition. I was also going to do a Superbird sedan and ute. So none of these vehicles, unfortunately, came to pass. But I guess under Rod Barrett, they did a GT Black edition, and then they did an R-Spec GT. There was that red and black, lipstick looking version, which had been copied off a Mustang in the US. Not a huge fan of that. Thought it could have been done a little bit more tastefully. And then there was a GTF, which was the final run. And these cars had the more powerful engine, which featured a 351 kilowatt engine. And that was something that I had put in my product plan for the future. I said I wanted to recreate a 351 high performance, badge like we had with the XW GTs, and that eventuated with the GTF. So the GTF featured 351 kilowatts, 477 horsepower, and 570 newton meters of torque, which is 420 foot-pounds. The R-Spec package and also the GTF 351 also had enhanced handling, and that included wider 9-inch rear wheels. In dyno testing of these engines, there was also an overboost function where the vehicles produced actually more power than what had been, put on the vehicles themselves, up to in excess of 380 to 400 kilowatts, which is 510 to 535 horsepower at the rear wheels. The GTF also had a launch control feature, and that, the GTF was also significant in that it was the final GT ever produced. As I said earlier, I'd moved on from FPV, and some of the marketing, Alan Moffat was used in some of the advertising. And I think that was fine from a V8 point of view. But one of the, I think, pitfalls of doing that was when I was running the marketing, I always had two strings to the bow. So you had the turbo and you had the V8. And I think the mistake that was made then was just pushing the V8 alone meant that you were, potentially not maximizing the volume you had from the turbo models. And it's very interesting to note that in the last full year that I was there with, Roger Gray and the other guys in the team, we actually sold more cars with the BF model in that final year before we left than FPEV ever sold again. Whereas what really should have happened once the FG was launched, I think if we had have still been there, we would have absolutely broken that record with the FG. So it was penny wise and pound foolish in terms of us all moving on, I think, and FPV eventually was wrapped up as a business entity. Total FG Falcon production was 191,314. Well, that's the FG episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's the second last in our series. The final one will be the FGX. Make sure you stay subscribed because there'll be full series on the Fairlane, the LTD, plus Holdens, Chryslers, and more. So thanks very much for watching. Please, if you haven't watched the full Falcon series, check out the playlist right there. And please also give the episode a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.